Hello, and welcome to another episode of Research Goes Live, the podcast by the University of Pannonia that focuses on the research of our doctoral students and discusses their importance and impact in our everyday lives. I'm your host, László Gábor, and today we are joined by Veronika László, a doctoral student from the Faculty of Business and Economics and the Doctoral School of Management Sciences and Business Administration. Welcome.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about your research, the main focus of your research, the science behind it?
In general, I'm dealing with how to make our food systems more sustainable. But this is a very, very broad topic. There are many scientists dealing with this topic. There are people who talk about dietary changes. There are people who talk about food waste, consumer behavior, agriculture. There are so many fields in connection with this topic. Well, my main research area is local food and how local food and local food systems can contribute to a more sustainable food system.
For our listeners as well, what exactly do we mean by local food systems?
A very good question. You would think that it is a very easy term, local food, a local food system. But actually, it is not as easy because everywhere other food products are considered as local. For example, in the United States, it's about geographical proximity, I believe. 100 miles radius is local food. But in the European Union, it's 40 kilometers radius, so it differs everywhere. But I believe it's not about geographical proximity. There can be other kinds of proximities, like value proximity, for example. And if you would ask consumers what is local food, for sure they would not mention 40-kilometer radius, but they would mention traditional or healthy, or I know the producer or Hungarian. So it is a very special thing what we call local food. But for sure, it holds some kind of value.
Interesting. So can you give us some examples of local food systems that you have dealt with? What are some products that are involved in this?
There are local food systems everywhere, for sure. And usually they have a very long history. We have traditional products, for example, in a local food system. We have a very beautiful local food system where we are now in Veszprém County, Hungary. There are many farmers markets, traditional food products. This area is famous about, so you can actually build up a local development strategy as well based on a very successful local food product. So it can be very important for every region. But if you would go to, for example, Italy or Spain, local food systems are very different. So it's always a very special question. So we cannot really compare these local food systems.
You mentioned Veszprém. What are some of the products here in Veszprém which are very traditional?
We have a small NGO dealing with local economic development with one of my supervisors. And we are visiting a lot of farmers and small markets, usually in this area, because there are very good circumstances to produce vegetables and fruits. There are a lot of raw products like fruits and vegetables typically in this area. But there are a lot of syrups or marmalade or bakery products here. Or there is this lavender.
Lavender,
for example, here.
Oh, yeah. So that would be more towards the south in like Tihany area.
For example, very famous, right?
Right, and they make a syrup out of lavender.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. See, that I wasn't quite sure about.
It's edible.
So yeah, a syrup out of lavender. That's fascinating because that's not something I thought that they would make a syrup out of. Now, when you mentioned sustainability then, so now we've pretty much covered what local food systems are. How does sustainability come into this picture?
Well, I have my own opinion about sustainability. If you look around research recently, everybody talks about sustainability. Meanwhile, it's such a strict term that we can never reach sustainability. We can always approach sustainability, right?
What is the exact definition of sustainability? Just so we're clear on why we can't approach it.
I define sustainability as something you can do on the long run, right? But when we talk about food, of course we are depending on natural resources. But there are these three main processes what makes our food system very unsustainable. First is growing population.
Mm-hmm.
The second is growing demand for food per capita, because when people are going from poverty to middle class, of course, they have a bigger demand, not just for food, but any resource. And the third is global warming and very bad circumstances for agriculture. And these three processes lead to shrinking edible land per capita. So for sure we know that our food system is not sustainable. We cannot feed the population. And there are many ways how researchers and experts are trying to make our food systems more sustainable. There are people, as I mentioned, talking about dietary changes,
Mm-hmm.
or the reduction of food losses and waste, or rethinking how we are dealing with, for example, soil management, or how we are ensuring the food security of a region. Here comes local food systems to the picture, because, for example, they can use small-scale agriculture, can use small land. It's much better for the soil, it's healthier for the region, it gives work for many people, and it's a healthier way to produce in general. It is not like an inclusive solution, but without strengthening local food systems, we cannot build up a healthy, sustainable food system in general. So it's a very special angle
Mm-hmm.
to contribute to food system sustainability, but I truly believe in it.
When you mentioned soil management, does vertical farming or hydroponics play any role in this?
Yes. Well, there are a lot of techno-optimistic and
Mhm.
techno-pessimistic people, right? And the basic idea of techno-optimistic people is usually precision agriculture or vertical farms. And I truly believe in vertical farms. Very good idea, but it might not work everywhere as a sustainable solution. Because in Dubai, it's an amazing solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have too many resources, but you have a lot of energy.
And can we define vertical farming just for our listeners in case they don't know what it means?
Well, a vertical farm uses a very limited portion of resources when we talk about, for example, soil or water
Mm-hmm.
or land,
Mm-hmm.
of course, but it uses a lot of energy.
Mm.
And when we are producing this energy, we also have to consider, do we produce this energy on a sustainable way? Because if we don't, we end up with a very, very unsustainable solution again. So in Dubai, we have a lot of, for example, sunlight. Maybe it's a better way to produce food there. But in Hungary, vertical farming is maybe not as sustainable solution.
Well, what would be a sustainable solution here in Hungary then?
I believe we are very lucky. We can produce much more food than we need. Of course, maybe on the long run, if we would protect our soil and our natural resources, it would be beneficial for us because it could be a strategical benefit for the whole country. But at the moment, this is not how it looks like because, for example, we have a lot of big-scale agricultural activity.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's from an economic point of view, at the moment, very beneficial. But on the long run, it might exhaust our soil and water and everything.
Yeah.
So on the long run for Hungary, I'm sure we should protect our water resources and the soil.
What is one of the most exhausting sort of crops when it comes to soil? Would that be corn?
I think monoculture in general.
Yeah.
And of course, soil is like a living, breathing thing. So when we are doing this big scale agriculture, no roots in the ground, the soil cannot breathe anymore.
So essentially, our society, since it moved away from the practice of crop rotation, it's not allowing the soil to regenerate the way that it should. This may be slightly off topic, but what I have noticed over the last few years, there have been more like news stories about accidents happening on roadways because of topsoil and dirt being blown out onto the road, which I thought was fascinating because Hungary always had so many trees along the sides of the roads and between farmlands, and they seem to be they're being cut out. And is this also leading to soil degradation?
Exactly. Very, very unhealthy. When you think about, for example, the wind, it's also very bad for the soil. It's like when your skin is damaged and you just leave it there without any protection. Soil is the same. in this way. You need the trees to protect the soil. From the wind, it helps to breathe the soil. It helps the water to go to the place where it has to be, under the soil. So
Right.
it's very important. Yeah.
Moving back a little bit to your specific research topic, you mentioned food waste.
Yes.
So let's talk about food waste a little bit. And can you define what food waste means for our listeners?
We can differentiate food waste and food loss. There's a huge food supply chain, how food gets from agriculture, from the land to your plate, right? And in the developing areas, we can talk about food loss, for example, as it goes from agriculture to processing and logistics. Because of some infrastructural problems, it cannot get to the consumer. So there is a lot of food loss on the food supply chain. But in the developed areas, we have very good infrastructure, right? So the food waste happens, meaning at the end of the food supply chain, usually due to not as sustainable consumer behavior, we are wasting the food. And we can also differentiate inevitable food waste and food waste we could prevent, right? So inevitable food waste is there are parts of the food you cannot simply eat. But it's not our problem. We have a lot of originally edible food that goes to the bin because we forget it, we don't handle it sustainably. So in the European Union, most of the food waste is generated by the households, unfortunately. So here, we should talk more about food waste than food loss, I believe.
I see. So it's less of a problem of supply chain efficiency
Exactly.
and more of what people, their practices, what they do in their own household. So can you give us some examples of how households are contributing to food waste?
Well, in the European Union, 70 kilograms of food per person goes to the bin every year.
Wow.
In Hungary, it's a little bit less. It's 66 kilograms per person, but still you see that there is a huge amount of food wasted. Part of it is like inevitable food waste, but the biggest part of it is something we could prevent with sustainable consumer behavior. Usually people don't really think about food waste, or due to some thinking biases or some just being ignorant sometimes, this is why the food waste happens. So we have to deal with usually consumers.
What is it that we can change in our practice then in order to minimize that food waste in our household?
Well, first I would recommend to somehow think it through what we will cook or what we will eat and what we will not eat. Because usually we just go to the supermarkets, buy what we like, and during the week we realize that we cannot eat that much or we don't want to eat that food product. And the problem is that we are experiencing a growing price for food.
Yeah.
Even though the price of food is not in line with the value of food. And if someone has the experience how to grow food, they realize that it's very hard work. So usually it's much, cheaper to buy in the supermarket, and consumers usually judge the value of something based on the price. That's why food waste happens.
And part of food waste then, as well, as we talked about this earlier, you went into detail about how composting works. So when it comes to composting, can you tell us a little bit about what are some practices or what can we do to effectively compost?
Well, more than half of the food waste of the household could be composted. And this would be a huge resource for us. If you think about, for example, circular economy, we should not even think about waste. And this is not a waste anymore. This could be used as a resource.
So therefore, by reducing food waste in our households and composting, we're actually kind of going back then and then helping regenerate our soil.
Exactly.
So this is helping with soil management then, which we talked about earlier.
Yes, goes back to the same problem. And also there are many countries where they are, for example, burning the household waste in order to generate some energy. And food waste is makes this waste very there's a lot of water in the waste, meaning that they cannot burn it as effectively.
Right.
So there are so many problems with food waste in our bins that for sure we have to minimize it.
Absolutely.
Either with composting or with prevention.
Hmm.
Yes.
Is Sweden one of those countries that, if I remember correctly, they have a pretty large facility on burning their waste and then using that to generate electricity?
Exactly.
Yeah.
For example, Sweden
Mhm.
and the Nordic area, usually they do that.
They always seem to be a step ahead. Yeah.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, they
Mhm.
are, because it is an area we can learn from,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because we're talking about sustainability and soil management. We're lucky, so maybe we're not really thinking about it that much because we do tend to be geographically blessed in that sense. We have good soil, we have fairly abundant resources of water. However, in Nordic countries, they don't necessarily have that. Maybe they have access to water, but not that much arable land, so good soil, and they have to be creative, whether they want to or not, and that situation drives innovation.
Well, for sure, they are protecting their natural resources.
Mhm.
And of course, they have a lot of, for example, awareness campaigns. So the consumers are very, very aware what to do, how to handle food in a sustainable way.
Mhm.
And also, they are protecting the regions. There's no food scarcity in any region, even though, for example, if you think about Finland, it's very hard to provide this, right? I used to study in Finland
Oh.
for half a year. That's where I started my research. And what I've seen, even though food was quite cheap compared to other products, people were valuing it, not throwing away ever. And I've seen that there were a lot of local products they were very proud of. So there are a lot of things we can learn from these other countries, I believe.
And that would make sense because they're reacting to their environment. So they know how valuable food is. They know what type of environment they live in and that it's not that easy to grow. So that also has an impact. You also mentioned education. So are there a lot of school campaigns usually in Nordic countries? So how early do they start in teaching food value and food sustainability?
We could talk so much about schools in Finland, especially primary schools. They do an excellent job. They have a very different school system as we have, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But they started to talk about food from first day, I believe. They are together collecting berries in the forest. They are cooking together. So it's a very different, education than we have in Hungary. In Hungary, there is something already started. So there are a lot of school programs led by usually expert groups like National Food Chain Safety Office of Hungary or universities. But it started not as well as in Finland, but there are already in Hungary as well teachers talking about food waste, or not just food waste, healthy food consumption, what is very important.
What is healthy food consumption? So what is it that we can do to improve our food consumption here in Hungary?
Well, I have a favorite diet called planetary diet.
Okay, let's hear about this.
Well, it's about a diet. It is designed by experts and researchers, and they believe if everyone would follow that diet, there could be 10 billion people on Earth living sustainably. Of course, there is not too much meat in this diet. There are a lot of plant-based foods, seasonal food products, what is very important, and food products that are typical in your region. So there are very healthy food products that we should not eat that much in Hungary, like for example, avocado.
Oh, okay. I love avocados. So.
I do as well, but it's not typical in our region.
Right.
So that's what we should follow. I think we should buy seasonal, regional, healthy. Health is always the most important issue. And of course, the best way is to buy from local farmers.
That's good advice. And with avocados as well, that actually kind of circles back to something that you mentioned before on three main processes. And the second one was growing demand when people are moving from poverty into middle class. And the first thing I thought about then was the types of products that those people demand then change. And that's where avocados kind of jumped into my mind, where I'm sure if you mentioned avocados 10 or 15 years ago in Hungary, most people would just kind of look at you with this strange look, like, what is this green, incredibly hard hand grenade that ripens in one day and you have to throw it out? And now it seems to be this very, very popular food. So now it's all starting to come together, and this is very good. When we talked about food system sustainability, we also mentioned consumer behavior. And one word kind of really stuck out when you mentioned certain biases that we have. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Well, for sure, I believe that consumer behavior is one of the key areas when we are talking about food system sustainability in general.
Mm-hmm.
Because quite often, consumers are actually striving to behave in a sustainable way, but they might have a lot of thinking biases, right? And like one part of my research is to talk about thinking biases for like unsustainable behavior in general, or the social representation of sustainable food consumption. I believe if we would understand better these like patterns of thinking of consumers, it would be much easier to like build up awareness raising campaigns or do the nudging, right, to help them to make better decisions when, for example, they are choosing food products or how they handle food products afterwards.
Right. Can you give us some examples of some biases that people have?
I have a very interesting new research. It's an ongoing research.
Okay, all right.
So I cannot give you too many results so far, but there is a general bias about, we call it attribution theory. Mm-hmm. Let's say I see you being late. I might believe that you don't care, that you are always late. If I am late, I will say that there is a traffic jam, or this is a bad morning. So I will say something out of my power. Mm-hmm. But if you do something bad, I will think that's your personal behavior, or it is you.
So it's kind of like a matter of perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when we are like doing unsustainable things, not just like food waste, but littering, usually we think that we do it because external circumstances, but you do it because you are that kind of person who wastes or litters. And this is very interesting when we think about food waste. People think that others waste food because they don't care. They are not responsible people. But when you ask them, why do you waste food? They will say first, they waste less than the average. Everybody say that they waste less than the average. And the second is because they have no choice. Of course, it's not true. But if we understand that people don't like to blame themselves, for example, it might help us to understand how to help them to make these better solutions. So it is just one from the many thinking biases we can detect from the food waste perspective. But as I said, if we understand these, we can build up much better awareness raising campaigns for sure.
And that leads into my next question on what is it that we can do in order to change these biases or immediately?
First, I would say nudging. Nudging is one of my favorites, term, because if you understand, for example, what are the barriers for people to act in a sustainable way, how much effort they are willing to do or willing to pay in order to make a sustainable act, you will better understand how to, change the surroundings, for example, in a cafeteria or in a school area, to help them. Let help them. Of course, people don't want to do too much effort, but just a little bit.
And is this where the nudging comes in? So it's not full out telling somebody you have to change your behavior. This is more like subtly kind of suggesting that maybe they should do something. This is like a good relationship where it's like, I'm not going to tell you you need to change, but here's what would be nice.
This is it's very, very good. how you defined it.
Mm-hmm.
We can differentiate. Awareness raising is when you know that you are affected by some information. Nudging, you don't know that you are somehow helped to make better decisions.
Oh, this is subliminal.
Exactly.
I see.
For example, it's very typical when you are in a cafeteria and healthy food is placed where you see it very well, and unhealthy food is placed under it. People buy unhealthy food much more often. It's just a nudging technique.
And I think grocery stores also do this, that there is certain product placement that is put at eye level, because apparently humans are very lazy to look down or up. So
Yes, and you have to pay a lot for these shelves.
yeah.
So they do the nudging as well, but not for that nice purposes.
And that's fascinating, because I think that's something that most people don't realize, that there's a system of economics behind this as well. It didn't get on that shelf by accident.
Well, nudging, the roots of this nudging, it's written down by Richard Thaler, this nudging technique.
Who's Richard Thaler?
He's an economist.
Ah.
So nudging is actually rooted from economics. Maybe not from sustainability purposes, but that's what my point. We have a lot of techniques in economics that we can use for sustainability. And I'm an economist going for sustainability, so it's working.
And now it makes sense, and now it all ties together. So for us and our purposes, as a country, here in Hungary, what would be the easiest first step that we can do in our households to reduce food waste and to think more sustainably about our food system?
I would suggest first prevention of food waste, meaning I believe we should design better what we buy. Also sharing food, and composting would be very important in Hungary. These are the three things, but my first suggestion always is to buy healthier food products, because usually what is healthy for us is healthy for the environment. So when we start to buy healthy, fresh, more plant-based food products, it's always better for us and for the natural environment. So that's my first advice for everybody.
Are you suggesting Hungarians should move away from the all sacred meat products, which I have noticed in this country?
Okay, some generations will need for this shift. I wouldn't say to anybody that no more meat, because this will never happen in Hungary, but less meat. Occasional meat consumption.
And I think you mentioned something just very interesting right now, is it's generational. There are some things that will not change immediately, some things that change over time and through education. So the older generation is never going to give up their secret meat locker, which I noticed that many villages have. They will be very proud of it and lead you up to either an attic or a small shed filled with smoked dead animal, and be very proud of showing you that. So that's not going to...
We will not bother them.
Yes.
Do it. Tradition, it's very important, but new generations are different. We just had a checkpoint, like competition for children.
Oh.
And we were talking about food waste and how to compost. These kids knew exactly what can be composted and what cannot be composted. Like, imagine when I was 5 years old, I had no idea what is composting. And they even knew exactly how to deal with these types of food waste. So I see the light at the end of the road, that these new generation have much more knowledge about how to deal with food.
It seems we're heading in the right direction,
Yes.
And the future does look bright.
They will solve our problems, hopefully.
Well, let's hope so. And to wrap up our conversation, everything that you have researched now, and all the things that you have studied, has it opened up any new research questions or fields that you want to research once you are done with what we've just talked about today?
Well, there was an advice from my supervisor when I started PhD, and for the future PhD students, I would suggest that. He said that there is one issue you have to pick for PhD and just deal with it. I did not take this advice, as you see. So I have many research fields, what I should do after PhD, right?
Right.
But I believe that I would like to deal with consumer behavior and how consumers are making decisions. Because I believe that at the end of the day, consumers are those who will have to change because the market will align with them. And agriculture will align with the market. So I'm sure I will deal with consumer behavior after PhD.
Sounds great. And this was a very enlightening discussion. And I really want to thank you for coming in today and sharing your thoughts with us and our listeners. And just a reminder to everybody to think sustainably. Think about the steps that you can take to reduce food waste at home. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe and join us next time as well. Thank you very much, Veronika, for coming in today.
Thank you.